sharing this morning as an event. So, thanks to you all. I'll start by saying, if you've been watching what's been going on in Davos, you would have seen our Prime Minister, our new Prime Minister, milling around leaders and ministers. But the whole purpose of Davos is to exchange those ideas to help profile what Canada has to offer, and what investment has to offer, and what sectors like IT and health have.
The handouts, we've got several. One is a list with the short profiles of each of the Canadian health IT companies that are present here today.
And I don't think there could be a better quote around the goal of personalized medicine than that. So I wanted to start with 3 stories, and I think these drive home the power of what we're talking about. The first is a 67-year-old woman with terminal colon cancer. She's run the course of treatment. Chemotherapy, conventional therapy didn't work, unconventional therapy didn't work. There's nothing left. Her genome is sequenced, and just as she's really contemplating that, there's no further, there's nothing further that can be done, her tumor genome sequenced, and from that, the researchers and the oncologists realized that her tumor is overproducing a certain type of protein that can be inhibited by a blood pressure pill that's on the market. So they give her a $1 a day pill, and she gets a cure. Unbelievable. But the first steps. Now, everyone quickly goes, is that blood pressure pill the cure for colon cancer? And that's looking at the wrong way. It was the cure for her colon cancer. It may be the cure for someone else's colon cancer, it may not be. But each cancer is quite different. They're actually finding therapies for the rare disease based on molecular understanding. And then the third area that I think is kind of the first area that's going to come into my space in primary care is pharmacogenomics. It actually translates more to a law of accelerating returns. Ray Kurzweil has traced this all the way back to the 1800s on information technology. And in fact, anything that's information enabled begins this progression. What's really quite interesting is when you start to think about it from the perspective of these multiple exponential technologies converging at once from a healthcare perspective. So the computational power that allows for the cancer agency to process a genome and analyze it and find a potential treatment, that keeps doubling. The sequencing ability, so sequencing, the cost of sequencing, at year 2000, the first human genome was sequenced. The project is about $3 billion spent on it. The actual kind of sequence cost about $100 million. You now can get that sequence for under $500 in the States. So it's coming down faster than Moore's Law. COPD or Parkinson's, that can plug into the sensors that you have, that can actually plug into data sets around your genomics and your personalized medicine, can actually use machine intelligence to create insights, can take, can ask you questions based on medical information of every journal that's ever been written. That stuff is very close to being here. And so when you think about it from an exponential perspective, the fact that it's even close means that in 2 years, 4 years, 1 or 2 doublings, we're going to see that. We're really not patient-centered. We treat everybody kind of in the one-size-fits-all. We make patients go all over the place to see us as providers, and we actually don't give the patients any of their data. Imagine the financial services industry if they didn't give you your data. You just can't imagine it, right? So that's the hype, and I'm excited about it, and I'm passionate about it. What I'm realizing as I really start to look at this is there are challenges ahead. And I love this one because there's personalized medicine crashing down on healthcare. And I think the challenges are threefold. The first, frankly, is complexity. And this is something that healthcare has got to figure. We've got to figure this out. I think this is doable, but it's going to involve a lot of collaboration. It's going to involve, healthcare providers looking at data they're not used to looking at. Marketers are more comfortable with some of this data, in terms of understanding things that are correlated, but not necessarily, positive. So we have to get through that, but I think that one's, achievable. The second is regulatory, and this one's tougher. It's a challenge. Our regulatory systems are not moving at exponential speed, and we probably wouldn't want them necessarily to move that quickly, but they need to move. And so, having these technologies come into the market, one of the big challenges is regulatory. And what I'm seeing are two trends that are quite interesting. And one is things that would have been marketed into healthcare, or things that are really potentially are healthcare related, are moving over into the wellness space, non-regulated space, and they're actually able to go through a couple of iterations. And I think we're going to see the disruption coming from solutions in wellness into traditional healthcare. The second trend I'm seeing is interesting, developing world. So the same way the developing world didn't build landlines and they went to cellular technologies, you think about that smartphone doctor. Well, the gold standard is, is a doctor, this white coat that you go and see in North America and the Western world. Yeah, most people are going to pick the dock over the cell phone right now. But if you're in Tanzania and there's no dock, the cell phone actually starts to look pretty compelling. Again, it's exponential technology, a couple of doublings, 2, 4, 6 years, that will come back and disrupt. So there's a real interesting piece there. And the third one, and this is I think the biggest one, is culture. Healthcare culture has to change. And we have to educate our healthcare providers of what's coming. So I'm 51, and I look at it from my perspective. Most of my colleagues don't understand this stuff, and they're going to be really challenged by a notion of, 3 patients come in that have type 2 diabetes. They all have the same basic blood parameters. Yet an algorithm in my computer is going to tell me to prescribe 3 different drugs for them, and I don't actually understand the algorithm. You think that's going to be a problem, right? And that's something that, when you look at kind of how these technologies are going to come into the marketplace, if you've got a solution, but you're not thinking of the cultural impact of that solution, you might hit a brick wall. And in building a company, timing is everything, right? So very important that we get ahead of that. And I think this is an area where TELUS is trying to play a role. I think there's kind of the ecosystem actually needs to play a role in terms of starting to educate both the public around what's going to come, but also, I think very importantly, starting to try to change the culture of healthcare. The big thing I think at this point in time is getting that engagement. Is starting to talk about it, getting engagement. I love the stories. I love the hype around it. I love the excitement. But this is actually the hard work, which is starting to figure out how is this stuff going to come in, who's going to pay for it, where does it make sense, and there's a bunch of just work that has to be done. But I think the opportunity there is really to transform healthcare. So I'm Chief Innovation Officer at TELUS Health. Not sure, I've met so many innovation officers, and we all seem to do different things. So I came back into this role in September and have been articulating an innovation strategy. Where I'm focused is actually, I've got a process called First Steps. And what it does is it actually, we meet with companies pre-confidential, pre-NDA, and we simply focus on the forces that are affecting their product, their company, their industry. Because we have lots of these conversations, we're actually able to aggregate some of those forces, that information around the forces across the category that the company's in, and we'll share that back with the company. But we're also able to aggregate it across the forces, so that a company that's is dealing with machine intelligence and wearables may benefit from a company that's in pharmacogenomics that's doing the same thing. So we're trying to do this as really to understand the ecosystem. There is some intent from on our side to be looking for partners through this, and so it's both the first step in terms of the company's thinking, but also first step from relationship with TELUS. And we're also very much looking at kind of what platform elements would you need in order to reach clinicians in the country. What's the API that would actually benefit you? And we'll use these conversations to inform our platform development so that
In 2014, with the $4.3 billion, we were more than double the 2013 of $2 billion. So we're on a pretty serious ramp. We're seeing the same thing going into 2016. We should have, I would suppose, somewhere around $5 billion worth of equity financing in the healthcare market. There were 5 IPOs last year. We're going to test on this a little bit later, so I'll tell you the answers. Invitae, Evolent, Fitbit, Teladoc, and MindBody. Which ones of those you want to short and which ones you want to go long on. One of the areas that are getting funding, it's healthcare consumer engagement, it's wearables and biosensing, personalized health tools and tracking, payer administration, telemedicine, care coordination. Those are the big buckets that are sucking in most of the financing. What are some of the fastest growing categories? Well, Brendan picked it. It's personalized medicine and healthcare tools. So 23andMe, Aravale, Helix, Invitae, public company with less than $5 million worth of revenue, which is about a $200 million market cap right now. Flatiron just raised $175 million. $175 million. This is a small company in oncology precision medicine, so pretty interesting. Care coordination, another big spot that's going on, and the other is life sciences technology, sucking up quite a bit of capital. Canada's doing well in terms of its funding environment. So, in 2015, there were 36 deals in 33 companies, total funding of around $100 million. Some good companies, Zymeworks, Electricare, coming in that market. Skipping to the M&A market, in 2015, 187 M&A deals announced, $6 billion worth of disclosed transaction value. Disclosed is the key item there. Most M&A transactions are not disclosed, so you have to add to that. 2015 doubled M&A's 2014's M&A. We see that, I see a pretty ugly wave of companies coming into the M&A market in 2016. Those that got funded in 2013 and 14, that didn't work. And now they're going out looking for buyers and don't have a whole lot of traction. Some of the big deals, IBM bought Merge Healthcare, MDN bought Allegra Health. Let's see, Welltalk bought Pretalytics. So with Anne on my left here, and we'll talk a bit about what they're seeing in the marketplace, what their companies are doing, and then we've got a few questions, and then we'll open up for questions from the audience. So Anne, all yours.
Hi, I'm Anne Weiler. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Wellpepper, and we are a Seattle healthcare IT startup. And I'm on this panel because I'm also secretly Canadian.
No accent.
Yes, I came here to Seattle in 2001 when Microsoft acquired a Vancouver company that some of you may remember. It was called Encompass Labs, and we made web content management software. So it was the first .com boom, and we were acquired by Microsoft, and they moved most of the team down here, which is an interesting perspective from how things have changed now. At that time, Microsoft did not have an office in Vancouver, and now we see Microsoft, Google, Amazon with massive offices out there taking advantage of the talent. So some positive things around how the industry has changed in that you can work from anywhere, but I think I'm going to maybe give you a little advice on the panel that healthcare may not be the same in that space. So my background, and again, I spent 10 years at Microsoft. My co-founder and I were both at Microsoft, and then we leapt into this crazy healthcare space. We have a platform for patient engagement, It's a digital platform that enables health systems to deliver custom treatment plans based on their own protocols, track outcomes against those treatment plans, and then personalize them for patients. We've been around about 3 years, and you know, it's super fun and also unbelievably hard.
Hello, I'm Marlena Grundy, and I'm with Cooper Smith Law and Strategy. Dr. Byrne talked about 3 of the challenges, one of them being the regulatory issues within healthcare, and that's where I come in. Our firm does only health law. That's all we do. The firm founder was former general counsel for the OIC, Office of Insurance Commissioner here in Washington State. And I met Lewis at a biotech meeting, actually, and when he talked about this, I said, oh my goodness, we do these startups all the time and they just don't realize some of the regulatory issues out there, and they're you know, bright, and they're talented, and they're innovative, but they just don't realize some of the challenges they face. And so I'm very, very happy to be here today because I love the startup energy, I guess is a good way to frame it. However, the challenges do exist, and if you do a startup and you are successful, which is the goal, you will deal with regulators more, not less. And so you will need someone to speak for you with those regulators, and that's where we come in. Personally, I do counsel startups, but I also do contracting between hospitals and insurance companies. I negotiate for the hospital. I'm the payer provider. I also flip my side on the table, and I go negotiate employment contracts with providers for hospitals, so the docs and the hospitals. Because of that, I see these internal documents all the time, and believe it or not, they do tie in with startups, because there are promises made by hospitals to insurance companies and by doctors to their hospitals that deal with innovation and technology, who owns technology, etc. And so when I go to the startups and I speak with people, sometimes they present these concepts that I suddenly start seeing this matrix of breach of contract kind of light up in my head. And so I don't want to be the negative person all the time. I want to be the person that helps with the workarounds. But I do want to let people know that there are some things that you face, that your actions as a doc may impact the contract with your hospital, but you may impact the hospital's contract with the insurer, and if there's breach, then everyone's going to be cross-pointing, and let's just figure this out early, not later, and deal with it. So I appreciate Louis having me here, and look forward to the rest of the panel.
Thank you. My name is Paul Terry. I'm the CEO of FEMI in Vancouver. This is my 6th startup. I started startups in 1988. We've had 1 public and 4 acquisitions in the last 30 years. 2 of them were unicorns, so valued over $1 billion. We moved into number 6 here into FEMI, which is essentially big data, aggregation of data, shaping of data, curation of data, privacy security, specifically because this is the 3rd unicorn I'm hoping. So, and the last one, I'm done after this.
Don't kill the unicorn.
No, I'm never done. No. I sat on the board of a big hospital in BC, St. Paul's Hospital, Providence Healthcare. We're just about to build another hospital, which will be a multi-billion-dollar hospital about 4 blocks away, which is changing the continuum of care, which will be centered around information and hopefully big data. I also sat on the board of Genome BC, on Life Sciences BC, on Molecular U, and I advise governments around the world on data strategies, especially in the world of the changing health. And last year, unfortunately, I had two super elite memberships from Air Canada, so I have no life, but I travel all the time.
I feel your pain. So I'm Brad Miller, Vice President of Clinical Solutions for Caradigm. So we're a Microsoft GE joint venture population health company that deal with a lot of data. And then comment on small data, I thought was actually pretty prescient in terms of a lot of things that we see around the country. So we can get to that in a little bit. My background is that I kind of go from a recovering position. I did an MD, MBA at Cornell, and ended up at UCSF doing research in economics and strategy in health information exchange, which is to say, that it's kind of gives you a lot of insight in terms of how and where technology is used or is not used inside of healthcare, in terms of where the actual value is pulled out in terms of the healthcare system. What I love about my role right now at Caradigm, in the past I had a lot of perspective in terms of clients that I had, whether it was Microsoft and their Health Solutions group, right? So we've got a little bit of a Microsoft legacy here, and sort of whether it was with them or Blue Shield of California, which is the payer down in California, on the San Francisco based. or ONC, which is the Federal Health IT Body, or the Beacon program. I've had a really nice chance to see healthcare across the country and really get a sense for what systems are doing, and now both with our existing customers in Caradigm and our prospects in terms of what they're looking for, where they need to go in terms of population health. Really, it's sort of also code for risk-based care, right? So as we're transitioning from fee-for-service, do a service, get a buck, to risk-based systems. I think a lot of the stuff we're talking about with data and personalized medicine as well. We're starting to see even like Genentech and Gilead and those sorts of companies coming to population health. When you're talking about a risk-based market, so we've got a really interesting, rapidly evolving market here in the U.S. that I'm looking forward to.
So thanks for the introductions, everybody. Go with that.
I can't say I'm an expert on the tax credits, but the Canadian government does a significant amount of reimbursement for R&D that's done in Canada. So there is overhead for that reimbursement, but there's a program called SRED, or SRED. And depending on what you're doing, you can get up to 70 to 80% of the cost of a developer back. Now,
Paul, you've done a few companies. Maybe you want to comment on that question as well.
Yeah, actually, the SREDs, we created them back in our first company, oddly enough, back in Ottawa way in the day. So our first company was in England, our second one in Ottawa, and the last four was in Vancouver. And the reason we live here is or in Vancouver is because the cost of R&D is half worth of what it would be in, let's say, Silicon Valley. I used to sit on the advisory board for JP Morgan, and the problem always used to be, I can get 3, 4, 5 smart people, then I run out of cash, and what do I do? The other issue is that in Canada, we have 6 universities in Vancouver, all pushing out people. So we actively train the people at master's level to actually take them out, to bring them into companies.
Then Microsoft hires them all.
And actually, interestingly enough, everybody's starting to catch on to this. So Microsoft has moved in. What do they call them?
Amazon.
Amazon is big. The visualization company for big data. Tableau is just hired 500 people in Vancouver. I just opened an office 2 weeks ago. So people are latching on to the fact that it's actually a very low cost of labour. And you're on the West Coast, it's 2 hours to San Francisco, so it's easy enough to go backwards and forwards. So that's a really big advantage of doing that. And it used to be the case, and it wasn't, and it's becoming the case again, that immigration is much easier into Canada. So in one of my companies, I pulled 30 people from China, the top 30 Chinese mathematicians, immigrated into Canada in 6 weeks. And so we ran the company basically from very smart people from around the world. That wasn't the case in the Conservative government. It's becoming the case again under the Liberal government as they're changing the immigration policy.
Interesting. I didn't know you could immigrate that quickly.
That was then.
Not down here. You
Are you
stopped.
going?
Yeah.
That's why Microsoft went up to Vancouver, because of the immigration issue.
Yeah, because of the immigration, that's right. And in Ottawa, we actually pulled 2,000 people from England into Ottawa when we did New Bridge back in the day. 2,000 in a period of about 9 months.
Brad, this one's coming at you. New question. So, what are some of the opportunities and challenges inherent in the U.S. health IT marketplace from the perspective of a Canadian health IT company? Interested in doing business in the Pacific Northwest. So, what do you see the cross-border challenges? I guess summarizing the question.
Yeah, and I think one of the ways that I would frame it too is in San Francisco, I advise a lot of other health startups as well, and I think that one of the things where I'm going with this is that I think when you're a startup company in Canada, you're used to a certain set of incentives in terms of what the healthcare system is actually either reimbursing or paying for, right? And so for me, a lot of the times, I mean, I've learned the lesson the hard way. If you want to see, it's not just about what could clinically work or sort of the big picture. It's also sort of what's going to be reimbursed and what's going to be paid for. Because otherwise, it's not going to be clinically adopted, right? Or cared for in terms of population health and care management. So we see that pretty broadly. So as a healthcare IT company, right, in terms of analytics and moving into care management, you also need to have time and space and money for care transformation in terms of workflow and the like, right? So there are many incentives and disincentives inside of a healthcare provider or a system in terms of adopting new technology. And I think understanding that from a Canadian perspective and then an American perspective, it doesn't necessarily translate across the border. And so just to understand that the systems are incredibly different in terms of what the incentives are, and if you're going to be a startup coming over here, you really need to understand not only fee for service and what are the sort of the minute rules in terms of that, but then also as health systems switch to risk-based care, you're going to have to understand where those are standing. The other piece is just that there is such a large it's very diverse across the country in terms of which systems are still massively fee-for-service and which ones are actually going to this risk-based model. And so just because you meet one health system doesn't mean that that's the way that it is across the entire marketplace. It's quite diverse.
Any other comments from the panel on that question?
Yeah.
What was the question?
Okay, I'll answer it and then we see if you have I absolutely agree with all those comments. Another thing to think about is don't underestimate how much you internalize from your own experience. And as an expat, and I've been an expat in the US, and a Canadian expat in the US, and a sort of US/Canadian expat in Russia. And when you go into another culture, that's when you start to see your biases and the things that you've internalized. So I made some assumptions, my co-founder and I both did, we're both from Canada, lived in the US, about the system, because we thought, well, we've lived in this system, we know how that works. But when we were at Microsoft, we had phenomenal healthcare. So we were, in almost the same position as we were in Canada, only better, because, I hate to say this, but it's true, like we got much better service. But we didn't have to pay for anything, and we never had to think about the cost. So from that perspective, we were the same. But then starting to understand, that's not everybody else's experience. And you don't understand how much you've internalized until you've been faced with it. So it's one thing to say, know the regulations, and you look at it from the outside, but you make some assumptions about how people use services, and those could be wrong.
Right, and just a concrete example, I wrote a CMS Innovation Grant, which is one of the sort of the leading efforts in the US to kind of push. It was a $10 million grant for a health system out east that was supposed to reduce 30-day readmissions post-heart attack, right, and use technology to sort of keep people out of the hospital once they get discharged, because in the US, 1 in 5 actually go back in within a month. 80% of their marketplace was commercial payers, and 20% were CMS, Medicare, Medicaid, which is the government payer here in the US. And because of that, the penalties all accrue on 20% of the revenue versus 80% of the commercial that they still get reimbursed for. And I'm going to let you sort of understand, or sort of guess what ended up happening to that project over the three-year lifespan of it.
Now I've got the question. Okay. The US is a very strange place. Okay, just so you know. So the rest of the world is much more similar to Canada than it is to the US. So if you're making a product for the UK, for South Africa, for France, for Germany, and the Canadian model is one has to get your mind around. We actually have the opposite problem, which is we're making products for these kind of public type of healthcare systems. So coming to the US feels like we've just gone to Venus, so this is really very strange. Data here is very institutionalized, it's not shared very much, there's not very much of it. You still use ICD-9 codes, which is really odd. And so forth as well. So it is actually a very different place in America from the rest of the world.
So Marlene, I want to dovetail right into the regulatory aspects, the differences between the US and Canada. That's an area of expertise for you. It's one of these areas that's overlooked by entrepreneurs, super important. So if you can talk a little bit about that.
Well, and many of the things we've just been discussing, the siloed information, et cetera, it all stems from how we're structured here. As far as regulations, though, both countries are very similar in what their governments are trying to protect against. Privacy. There's a lot of data out there, and both governments are trying to protect their citizens and how their PHI, their personal health information, is used, disclosed, etc. And it's a concern for citizens. So on both sides of the border, you have your privacy regulations. In the United States, we have our federal, and each state has their own privacy regulations, and both apply. In Canada, you have federal and provincial regulations, which may or may not apply, or perhaps both. So it's maybe a little bit more straightforward in the US, and that both do apply. But if only one applies, if you're in Canada and only one applies, then it might provide an opportunity for you to do something that would be more difficult here in the United States. Medical device is something a little bit different that I am hopeful on, because we have a pilot program between the United States and Canada on medical device, and hoping to get a streamlined process where it's approved in one country, it is automatically approved in the other. It's a pilot program right now, so who knows whether it will go forward or not. But because the regulations are so similar between the two countries, that's something, an area, like a carve out, I think that we might be able to make a lot of progress on, and that would streamline it for startups, period. One of the things Dr. Byrne brought out also, was the looking at your startup and kind of maybe launching it from a place that's less regulated, and he mentioned wellness. That's a great idea, but keep in mind that if you become successful, it's probably just going to become regulated, and that was that's the lesson from Theranos from last year. Theranos, if you aren't familiar with it, has a blood test. They say one prick, one drop of blood, and they can test for diabetes, I believe it is. And they built their whole model against an unregulated area of the FDA. So we're talking about lab tests here, but the FDA does not regulate lab tests if it's one specific test at one lab, and it was a carve out for academic universities, etc. So they're doing research and say you're testing this one subset of a subset of a subset of a population, and you come up with this one lab test that you only use at your institution. Well, you don't have to get FDA approval for that one lab test. Well, Theranos saw that and they thought, okay, we're just going to do one lab, we're going to do one test, we're going to scale this, and they did very successfully, and the FDA noticed, and the FDA did an on-site investigation. The FDA did not have authority to shut them down, so they just said, well, your tube is a medical device, and now we're going to regulate you. And so, again, it's just a cautionary tale that you may start out somewhere, but you may become regulated. You're one legislative session away from a possible regulation. Again, Theranos handled it incorrectly, I believe, because what did they do? They attacked the regulators. And their CEO, she's on the news all over saying, well, they just don't understand what we do. Not a good thing to do. You know, that I strongly caution against that. So if you're going to deal with regulators, hire a spokesperson, hire a lawyer, hire someone that knows how to speak regulation. Quite frankly, they should have anticipated this. When you're an initial startup, what you want to look at legally is, am I prohibited? When you get more money and you become more successful, then you need to look at how you might become regulated, and it would have been a lot better for them to get in front of this and say, you know what, we anticipated this, and because of that, we have this plan in place and that plan in place, and we are going to work with the FDA, and we are going to care for our patients, yada, 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 and you just do the whole spiel. So regulation on both sides, it's there. Both governments have good intentions. It has consequences, though, and it's just something that we all need to be aware of.
Brad, you're over there squirming.
I think the other problem with Theranos, though, is a lot of vaporware behind it as well, right? So, I think the difference, too, is we see a lot in terms of, I get a lot of, well, what about Uber and those sorts of companies? But with Uber, there was actually substance and revenue and lots of other, people like to debate their valuation, but at least there was a lot of momentum behind those folks. Theranos really had a lot of vaporware around it, too, because they're actually not doing the tests that they said that they were doing. So
they're doing the academic research now.
Yeah.